Greetings, Gusters. Just poured myself another beer. Oops, I mean my first beer, obviously. Did I say another by mistake? We're going Italian again tonight. Not that you'll tell from the shirt or from the beer, because this is my tiny Rebel Welsh beer. But yeah, and it's Stay Puft again. Just fresh batch of drive today. We're going Italian. We're going to make some gnocchi.
I'm having a gnocchi.
And for you heathens out there, gnocchi is not pasta. It's actually a dumpling. So we're going to make dumplings. We're going to make some gnocchi. And we're going to do it in a nice garlic cream and thyme and gin flavoured sauce. So, welcome to Gnocchi Saturday. There's a relevance to that, sort of. At the back here, I've got on a pan of boiling water, and we need to add a bit of salt to it. So I'm just going to chuck a generous pinch of sea salt in there. Let's get that out of the way. Oh, my gin's in the way of that. Let's move the gin. And we're going to get that boiling, because that's where we're going to cook our gnocchi.
I'm having a gnocchi.
Okay, but obviously we're going to make our gnocchi first. Now, I already said gnocchi, people think of it as a pasta, but it's not. It's actually a dumpling. It's small lumps of dough that were traditionally composed of flour, wheat flour, egg, salt and potato. However, there are variations on that. Some of them are added flavourings, such as semolina and cheese and things like that, or herbs that you'd mix in with that dough. But there's also versions where they replace the base ingredients, and that's what we're going to be doing. Okay, so we're not actually putting any herbs or anything like that into our gnocchi. We're going to put some cheese in it, but we're replacing a potato with, wait for it, couldn't remember where I put it, it's right in front of me, ricotta. Okay, so I've got 250 grams here of ricotta, and what I've done is I've just shoved it in a strainer just to dry it out. Now, you can do that overnight, okay, that's been there a few hours, so that's drained through. So I've got 250 grams of that. I've got one largest egg yolk. I've got 30 grams of finely grated Parmesan. I've got 50 grams of plain flour. And then I've got some nutmeg and some pepper. And I'm going to add a pinch of salt. And that essentially is our ingredients for our gnocchi. So like I say, you'll need to get a pan on. Well, you certainly will when you need to cook it. So I've got that on the back burner there. So let's get making our gnocchi. They come up to the boil, but we don't want it being too violent when we put our gnocchi in there, otherwise we might end up with just sludge. So what I'm going to do is just turn that temperature down, so we've got a nice simmer going on, but not too much boil. Now, gnocchi are usually cut, well, they're rolled up and they're cut into small pieces, about the size of a wine cork or even smaller, and sometimes they're textured. Now you can use one of these little boards that I've used in one of my other pasta recipes. You could just use the tines of a fork, it's up to you. But we're not going to bother texturising our gnocchi. We're just going to roll them and then cut them up into small pieces. Traditionally, a gnocchi was served as a first course, a primo plato, but it could equally be part of a main dish, and when it was normally served as a contorno, which was a side dish. Should give me Italian lessons today. Oh, I'm just as good, aren't I? No wonder I'll win things like Oscars and that. Now, so like I said, we need some ricotta, and I've transferred that to my bowl. I'm just going to sort of lightly mash that up, and then what we're going to do is we're going to chuck in that 30 grams of Parmesan, and I'm sort of going to roughly mix that in for a little bit, And then I'll add my 50 grams of plain flour and roughly mix that in. And then we're going to add a good generous pinch of nutmeg, and I'm going to add some pepper. Now I've got white pepper there simply because the other grinder is a bit coarse and you don't really want sort of black lumps in it. So I'm just going to mix that together, and then remember our final thing is our egg yolk, which doesn't actually want to come out. It likes my little dish so much it don't want to come out. Come out now. And we're now just going to mix all this together. So just with a spatula or spoon or whatever, we're just going to mix this all together. Now this is going to form our gnocchi. Now when we boil them, when we cook them, they should swell up a bit, okay, because at the moment you might think we're buggering around. This is enough for 2 people. Okay, it's not going to be a big dish. Okay, if you wanted, you can make more, with double the quantities. You'll be eating a lot of gnocchi. I said to you about they normally cut about the size of a wine cork or smaller. They can be cut even smaller. In soup, they often had like a perforated spoon or a sort of quite coarse grinder, and you push it through that to form really tiny little gnocchi, which you would then put into soup. Now, you might notice behind me, apart from me here, I've got some other ingredients. So I've got my plain flour, that comes from when I roll out my gnocchi. I've got some thyme, plenty of thyme, wife's in the above. So I've got some thyme, I've got some garlic cloves, which I just peeled. I've got some more Parmesan ready to grate. I've got some gin, because we're going to flavour our sauce with gin. And the other things I've got here is another 30 grams of Parmesan, and I've got 250 grams of double cream. And now I'm going to use creme fraiche. Creme fraiche, I think Cartman said. But double cream, or whatever you want. The gin's optional, you don't actually have to add any alcohol to it. So, let me just make sure that's all mixed. So I've got myself a piping bag here, and what we're now going to do is we're now just going to transfer our dough, as it were, into a piping bag. Now I've not got a nozzle in the end, we're just going to cut the end off the bag, and we're just going to use that open end. You can put a nozzle on if you like, put it around those. Actually, I did think about putting like a star-shaped nozzle on, because I thought, well, that had a bit of texture, but then I thought, no, don't bugger about, and end up creating a problem for yourself. So, that's my gnocchi dough in my bag. Get rid of that. Now, you might have noticed behind me, I've also got a dish. Now, what we're going to do with that dish is I'm going to put some oil in that. So that is going to be where we're going to put our cooked gnocchi. Okay. Just to get a bit of uniformity, that's why we're piping it. But we're going to want to flour our surface, and we're going to want plenty of flour because we want to make sure these don't get sticking to each other or anything else. So I said to you that, you know, these gnocchi can be flavoured. Gnocchi's found all over sort of different regions of Italy. Well, actually found all over Europe. We'll come into that bit in a minute. For instance, in the Lombardy regions, Tuscany regions, they often refer to like malfetti, which means poorly made. And they're made with ricotta, like we are, flour, and spinach. No, we're not adding spinach to ours, and other herbs. And like I said, we cook it in salty water, and then it's usually accompanied by a sauce. Now, that can simply be melted butter, it could be a pesto, it could be a cream sauce, it could be anything you like. Now, the word gnocchi,
I'm having a gnocchi.
I'm going to get a bit of flour out. The word gnocchi is actually derived probably from the Italian word Nocchio, which means wood knot, you know, a knot in the wood. But it's also possible it's from the word nocha, which meant knuckle, you know, like your knuckle or your pig's knuckle or whatever. So I'm just flouring that surface, and now we're ready to start piping our gnocchi. So I've cut the end off from my piping bag, okay, and I've got my flour surface, but I was just telling you about where the word came from. It dates all the way back to Roman times, and the Romans basically had a dish that was like a semolina porridge, or like a dough made from a semolina like porridge mixed with eggs, and then they made them into these gnocchi. But as the legions spread through Europe, they took this dish with them. Hence you will find it in various different parts of Europe. So what I'm doing here is I'm just piping some strips of this dough . I'm just going to have to get a bit more flour down there. Okay, and also what I'm going to do is I'm just going to add a good pile of flour there, because as I cut them up I want to roll them in flour so they don't stick together, and then they'll be ready to cook in there. So anyway, just to let you know, there was a Tuscan book, a book from Tuscany, Tuscan book, dated back to 1300s, and we have fragments of it, and in one of them, don't escape me, there was a recipe for gnocchi. I'm going to have to read this. If you want gnocchi, take some cheese and mash it. Then take some flour and mix it with egg yolks as if you were making dough. Place a pot of water over a fire. When it starts boiling, place the mixture on a board and slide it into the pot with a spoon. When they are cooked, place them on the plates and top them with a lot of grated cheese. So essentially exactly like we do today, although we're going to be adding a sauce. So we now need to chop our gnocchi up. So we only want, we only want little short bits. I'm just going to flour my knife because it's sticking a little bit, and like I say, we're just chopping them up into little lumps, and then we're just going to toss them over here, in some flour so that we'll be ready to start cooking them. Now we've got the water on the boil. That's quite sticky, that one. I need a bit more flour under there. We've got the water on the boil, but when we shove the gnocchi in there, obviously it's going to go off the boil for a little bit. So we're going to need to cook this in batches, and this is where my little tray comes from, because what I'm going to do in here is I'm just going to add some oil, and the idea being, when we remove them from the pan of boiling water, we'll chuck them in here, give them a little toss, in the oil, and then we just put them to one side while we prepare the sauce. So I'm just going to get the rest of this bit chopped up. So I know I said I was going to get the rest of them finished. I piped it all, but I want to get going with cooking my gnocchi. So I'm just going to drop them in. Now they will sink, and the idea being you'll know when they're cooked because they will rise to the surface, and then you give them just under a minute and scoop them out. And like I say, we're going to cook these in batches, otherwise the water temperature will drop. And like I said, we want it on just sort of a bit of a slow simmer, not too many bubbles there. And the other thing to bear in mind, that when you're chucking them in here, they should swell up, so don't put too many in. So just give you a little bit more about gnocchi.
having a gnocchi.
Right, give me all over. Good job the lid was on that. Verona holds Gnocchi Friday. Now this is linked back to a famine that occurred in Verona in 1531. And essentially the rich of Verona felt that because of the high prices of food and the high price of flour and stuff like that, that they owed it. Now some of these are starting to rise to the surface. So like I say, we'll give them about a minute and then oik them out, drain them off and put them in that pan of oil or a tray of oil, just so that we can oil them up so they don't stick together. So I was saying, so they felt it was their duty to help the poor out, and there was one man in particular, Tommaso de Vico, who actually wrote a line in his will saying that he wanted part of his fortune to be used to give wine and ingredients for making gnocchi to the poor. And so ever since the last Friday of Lent, they hold this Bacchanal del Gnocco, which is part of the carnival, and celebrate gnocchi. The Papa del Gnocchi goes through the streets with a great big golden fork with a great gnocco stuck on top. And I've said gnocco twice. Gnocco is a singular. Gnocchi is the plural. So gnocco is one, and just about most of mine are floating now. So we're going to oik them out in a minute. So, like I say, Verona celebrates gnocchi, and in the 19th century, Artusi, who was renowned as the grandfather of Italian cuisine, he actually published a recipe for potato gnocchi, because by then potatoes had come over from the Americas and was now becoming incorporated in the European diet. So like I say, we're just going to chuck that in there. Got two left in there. Put them in there. And I'm just going to give them a little toss together because we don't want them sticking together. And then just wait for that to come up to boil, and we'll chuck the rest in there. So like I say, he included a recipe for potato gnocchi, but he also talks about an old woman who, when she put them in her pan, the gnocchi evaporated because she didn't use enough flour to keep them together. Luckily, my first lot looked like they're fine. I was worried I might end up with a floury sludge. So, I'm just going to keep the rest cooked off and then we get on with the sauce. Now, if you were doing this without all the commentary and everything, whilst these are cooking, you could be cooking the sauce. It can be quite quick once you've prepared this bit, and you can be cooking that gnocchi, getting the sauce ready, and then you're all ready to combine everything. But I do too much talking and drinking. That's our gnocchi all cooked. I'm putting over there. Now I've got a pan here, and what I've got here is, like I say, 250 grams of either double cream, or in my case I'm using creme fraiche. Actually, I was a bit intrigued as to what's the difference between creme fraiche and sour cream, and it's essentially partly to do with the fat content, but it's also to do with the way they sour it. So sour cream is sour because it's got lactic acid in it, probably from lactobacilli, whereas creme fraiche is soured with a different sort of bacteria and such, make it slightly different. Anyway, what we're going to do here, now obviously this isn't quite as runny as double cream, but what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put it on some heat, and we don't want the heat of the garlic, we just want the garlic flavour. So I've got, you might only want to use two, but I like my garlic, so we'll put in some garlic cloves in there, and we just basically heat that through when we're making the sauce, and then we'll remove the garlic at the end. You can leave it in there if you like, I suppose. Depends whether you want to eat the garlic or not. Now, I said to you, gnocchi is found throughout Europe. Just to add a bit of confusion, the French, I don't know whether this is just the French being the French or whatever, but they have a dish, gnocchis à la Parisienne. pronunciation's going. Probably not enough beer. Actually, before I had that, I had some sticky toffee pudding again. They've got it back on release again. So I bought some, and it came this morning. So I had to try it, didn't I? It is exactly like it was last year, just to reassure you. By the way, the other thing I'm going to do while it's doing that is I'm going to take some thyme, and we're just going to sprinkle some thyme through it. Now you're going to want to keep some of this thyme back. There's a little bit of a garnish if you like, but I'm just going to add some of that into there now. So I'm saying to you, the French have this dish, gnocchi à la Parisienne. That's actually gnocchi made of choux pastry, just to make it completely different. Choux pastry served with a bechamel sauce. In Nice, there's a speciality, gnocchi de tantaflay à la Nisada, which is basically made with potatoes, wheat, flour, eggs, and Swiss chard. So sometimes gnocchi does mean something a little bit different. Now, we're getting towards the end of the boring history bit, if that's what you find boring. But there is a little bit more, I'll tell you in a minute. So all I'm going to do is I'm just going to add a good amount of thyme to this, give it a good stir while it warms up. And then the only other thing we'll be putting in a little bit is our gin and our cheese. But we don't put the cheese in while the heat is on. So that's cooking through. That's running low. And what I'm going to do at this point, and like I say, this is optional. You can add any kind of alcohol you want. I'm going to have a generous double measure of gin. I'm doing Bombay Sapphire, even though that's my Maidstone distillery, what's the name? But simply because my Maidstone distillery gin's a bit more expensive and a bit nicer. So in this instance, I'm not going to cook with it. So we're just going to mix that in, and we're going to cook that through. And as usual, when you add alcohol to most of these dishes, the alcohol is going to evaporate off anyway. Okay, so I've got a little bit of thyme left. I've got some Parmesan there ready to add. I've also got some thyme in my Parmesan because I suddenly realised off camera I was busy picking it, taking off the stems and putting in my cheese instead of in there. And I've also got some pepper, some more white pepper that we're going to add. Now at the very end, if we feel we want some more pepper, we'll grind some fresh black pepper. Okay, but like I say, we don't add our cheese while the heat is on. So we want to get this just cooked through for about another minute or two, and then I'm going to take the heat off, and we'll add some pepper, and we'll add some Parmesan, and then we'll be ready to chuck our gnocchi back in there. Oh, one more fact about gnocchi.
I'm having a gnocchi.
So I said to you it's spread through Europe, but also South America, Argentina, Paraguay, and so on, mainly because there was a significant number of Italian immigrants went out there, and as a result, gnocchi became a popular dish. So much so that on the 29th of each month, there's a tradition of having, or just going to say there's a lump in there, then realise that's the garlic. There's a tradition of having gnocchi, and under your plate quite often you would put some money, and the idea being that this was meant to bring you prosperity in the future. In Argentina and Uruguay, gnocchi, sort of, well, I don't know how to pronounce it, it's pronounced slightly differently, but basically it's gnocchi, is slang for these bogus employees, because it ended up getting linked to corruption and things like that to do with, obviously, with the money. But it ends up being one of these bogus employees who essentially doesn't actually do any work for the company. He's just on the books, and they turn up at the end of every month to collect their wage, and then you bugger off and you never see them again for another week. So there you go, that's all my facts about gnocchi.
I'm having a gnocchi.
We're getting close to turning the heat off. So now I'm just going to add a little bit of pepper, and I'm going to add another 30 grams of Parmesan. Oops, didn't turn the heat off, very naughty. And we're just going to stir that through and give it a little bit of a chance for that Parmesan to melt into that sauce. At which point we're now going to add in the non-stick gnocchi that I've stuck to what I've splashed all over me. Just going to add that to that, and we're going to stir that through, and we are now at this point you want to try and find your garlic, especially since some of them are about the same size as the gnocchi. So that could be a surprise for your guests if they bite into that and they're not so sure about the garlic. So, now your gnocchi earlier, I said to you, you know, like we put in that dish, you can at that point, if you wanted, freeze it. You could freeze it and then obviously bring it out and sort of cook it through the sauce if you was to make loads of it, but we haven't. So, time to start dishing it up. So I'm going to add a little bit of thyme on top. I'm going to add a little bit of fresh ground black pepper, and we're going to add a little bit of Parmesan. Forgotten what was added. So I've added a little bit more thyme. Just a little grind of black pepper, and then preferably on the right side of the grater. We're going to add a little bit of grated Parmesan on top, and then we're ready to try our ricotta gnocchi with a gin, garlic and thyme sauce. So, give it a go. The creme fraiche gives it a tang to it, which obviously if you use double cream you wouldn't get. Getting through the sort of the thyme, and I can taste the gin, but there you go. There is your semi-traditional ricotta gnocchi. Cheers, Uncle Brink.